Good morning, and welcome to Daily 15. My name is Lucas. I created Daily 15 to help make philosophical works more accessible, to remove their barriers, obscure language, allusions to other philosophy, and at times their sheer length. The goal is simple. Spend a few minutes, around 15, in the morning engaging with an interesting philosophical text. We start with a paragraph, and then I explain some of its ideas, highlight bits of it, circle them, or underline them, to draw out their importance and their relevance to you, or perhaps just why they're worth thinking about. We then close with a second paragraph, which we encourage you to think about for yourself. New readings come out every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday at around 8 in the morning. We hope to see you there. If you want to join the conversation, to discuss and think about these paragraphs with others, which we really do recommend, head on over to community.alifeofthought.com and create your free account. Free users get full access to Daily 15s, so don't worry about that. Or if you'd like to mark the Daily 15 up to annotate the second paragraph for yourself, you can head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15. With that being said, let's turn to today's paragraph. The title for today's paragraph is Habit and Love in Proust. And quite fittingly, the excerpt comes from Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. In the passage, Marcel discusses the connection between habit, memory, and the process of forgetting someone, and becoming indifferent. Paragraph 1 begins. Now, the memories of love are no exception to the general laws of memory, which in turn are governed by the still more general laws of habit. And as habit weakens everything, what best reminds us of a person is precisely what we had forgotten, because it was of no importance, and we therefore left it in full possession of its strength. That is why the better part of our memories exist outside us, in a bladder of rain, in the cell of an unaired room, or of the first crackling brushwood fire in a gold grate. Wherever, in short, we happen upon what our mind, having no use for it, had rejected. The last treasure that the past has in store, the richest, that which, when all our flow of tears seems to have dried at the source, can make us weep again. Outside us, within us, rather, but hidden from our eyes in an oblivion more or less prolonged. It is thanks to this oblivion alone that we can from time to time recover the person we were, place ourselves in relation to things as he was placed, and suffer anew because we are no longer ourselves, but he, and because he loved what now leaves us indifferent. In broad daylight of our habitual memory, the images of the past turn gradually pale and fade out of sight. Nothing remains of them. We shall never recapture it. Or, rather, we should never recapture it. Had not a few words, such as this head of the Ministry of Posts, been carefully locked away in oblivion, just as an author deposits in the National Library a copy of a book which might otherwise have become unobtainable. Thank you, Proust. That was beautiful. Great. I want to spend some time thinking about precisely what Proust is saying here. And so that brings us to our highlighted phrase. What best reminds us of a person is precisely what we had forgotten. This is counterintuitive. We imagine that what best reminds us of a person are the things that we most clearly associate with them. If my friend and I frequent a coffee shop or we have a shared quote-unquote spot, it is the fact that we frequent it, the fact that that area, that place is so closely associated in my memory of them, that allows it to, whenever I pass by it, bring them into my mind. And so we might initially be really skeptical of what Proust is saying. The idea that, no, actually, it isn't the sort of spot or the coffee shop or the strong memories, the memories that you return to, that best remind us of a person. But rather, says Proust, no, it's quite the opposite. It's exactly the things that we have forgotten, the things that at the time we thought were unimportant, that we pushed out of our minds. But I think it will benefit us to be a little bit more charitable to Proust and to hold a magnifying glass up to what he's saying, to try to get his point. Because I think when we look closely, it begins to look really interesting. So here is my impression. I think the idea is that when a relationship or a friendship ends and we go about our lives without the other person, the things that at first constantly remind us of them, they begin to lose their power. And this is sort of obviously true, right? This is certainly true in the case of grieving, right? The things that initially throw me back into my life with the one who I have lost, you know, if they keep on throwing me back, eventually they wear down. They sort of become dull. So if there were a coffee shop, for instance, that my friend and I frequented, the more and more I pass by it and am reminded of her, the less powerful it will become, right? Each time that I walk by it, I'm reminded of her, and then, you know, we've separated, so we're not going to see each other again. Each time my desire that it brings about in me, or this memory is disappointed in this way, the memory is sort of disconnected from the person, or rather not the memory, but the place itself. The coffee shop eventually takes on its own independent existence. It separates, it unfuses, so to speak. Eventually, I'll go to the coffee shop and not think about this other person much at all. And this is the process of becoming indifferent. But Proust notes that this is only true of the things that are always in our face. I forget about, or not forget, but I become indifferent to the coffee shop because I see it every day. It's constantly being tested, so to speak. The power weakens because I see it so often. And Proust draws a natural conclusion from this, that it is the things that we nowadays rarely think of, the things we rarely engage with, the places that could bring someone to mind, but do not because we simply do not interact with them, that retain their power, and therefore later in life have the most power to draw us back into the past. And so I think this is a good segue to the piece of the paragraph that I've underlined. This phrase, the name of the position, head of the Ministry of Posts. Because if if this is your first time reading it, that might make no sense to you. Why is this important? But this, I think, serves as an example of exactly the sort of thing that Proust is thinking is a candidate to throw us back into the past. The head of the Ministry of Posts was the name of a position that the main character, Marcel, simply overheard when he was still with his beloved. He did not know what the position was when he heard of it at the time, and so he did not much think of it then nor later. Now, however, as he hears it, it suddenly means much more, and it means more not because he now knows what the position is. To be clear, nobody cares. It does not it does not matter who the head of the Ministry of Posts is. The only reason this position matters to him is because it is the name of a position he heard discussed when he was still with his beloved. That is the only sense in which it is important. But because of that, Proust might say, his memory leaves it in full possession of its strength. Because it is not an otherwise important position, it is not detached from the Gilberte, the woman who he loved, and it's able to retain the strength. So hearing it then brings him back in memory to the moment at which he was still in love, to the moment when he heard this for the first time. It's sort of like the experience of walking by the coffee shop. But the only difference is, though the coffee shop is quickly detached, this is like a normal part of the grieving process. This title, Head of the Ministry of Posts, is not something that comes up in Proust's life until much later. And so it has the same effect that you might expect your shared coffee shop to have a week after you separate, but so much later in your life. And that brings us to our circled phrase. About halfway through the paragraph, Proust says, "It is thanks to this oblivion alone that we can from time to time recover the person we were." Now, I think it's important to head off something that Proust does not mean. Proust does not imagine that when we have an experience of involuntary memory, when we hear the name of a position that we haven't heard in a while, we're somehow actually thrown back in time. He's not of the view that that happens. But a more interesting question is, in what sense do we recover the person that we were? So what is he talking about here? I think it's important first to talk about the sense in which we might lose the person that we were. Now, this is something that our common language, even though Proust wrote, I don't know, a while ago, we still use this terminology. We talk about our old selves, right? The old me doesn't feel like the new me doesn't feel like the old me does. Or for instance, someone might say, yeah, my past self is dead. This is now you're able to respond, listener, by saying, that's a very Proustian thought. But regardless, this is a common way of speaking. So what does it mean? Well, I think part of the idea is that Proust thinks there are some things, some attitudes or ways of looking at the world that we have, which are sort of core to our identity. And one of these is a specific way of relating to another person, right? We might love another person. This is very common in Proust. And in his mind, loving and valuing another, and then coming to no longer feel that way, ceasing to value, ceasing to love, is such a drastic change that it represents, in one way or another, the creation of a new self, a sort of new character. And though it's still the sort of same person, because it must be, it's a new self, and the old self is still a part of our history. It's almost as if our perspective is so different, so foreign to the perspective of our old self, that if he were to meet us walking down a corridor or run into us in a cafe, and he were to ask, oh, well, how do you feel about this person? Our response would seem to him like the response of another person. We will have just diverged to such an extent on this core question of value. But there's always, and I think this is Proust's point, the possibility for reconnection. And so the idea is here that by coming into contact with these old memories, we're not simply reminded of the person that we used to be. We don't, hear this name, this title, Head of the Ministry of Posts, and think, there was a time when I was in love with Gilberte. There was a time when I found her valuable. See, when we talk like that, we're still talking about ourselves like we might talk about another person. If my friend is in love, I might say that he finds his beloved valuable. He loves her. But it's sort of a love that I experience secondhand. And in the same way, if I'm simply remembering that I loved Gilberte, I'm experiencing that love from afar. Now, Proust is not talking about that. Rather, he's talking about a sort of regression. I think that's a good word. The idea is that we somehow fall back into the mind of the past self. We become the self who loved all over again. And, well, what does this amount to? It amounts to once again valuing that person. It amounts to once again loving them. And this is sort of, it's a real double bind because, in a sense, they've already been lost to us. And so in becoming the person who we were, the person who finds our beloved valuable, who loves them, we feel the loss we once felt even more sharply. It's like losing them all over again. You know, you might conjure up an image. It's like bringing the old me back to life only to show him how much I've changed and how much of an effort I've made to forswear and disavow all of the things he cares about. To sort of give an analogy, in a way, it's like reviving the king of a long gone, long lost to time empire, only to show him its ruins, right? It's tough enough that he had to die in the first place, right? He already has that memory. And now he has to learn that not only was he forgotten to time, was he sort of pushed aside, but his empire is gone and there's sort of nothing he can do to bring it back to life. And so in the same way that he might have mourned the end of his life, he now has to mourn all over again. Except, and I mean, this is what makes Proust's point so very powerful, there's no king that we're reviving. The person who comes back to life is us, right? We become the king who was lost to time. And in reviving our old selves, they're thrown into this world in which everything that they cared about, the very things that defined their existence, because losing them marked the end of it, are gone. And so they're thrown into a cold and unforgiving world, one that they can't do anything but grieve for. Oh my God. Okay, so on that happy note, we can head on over to the second paragraph. Proust begins, "But this pain and this recrudescence of my love for Gilberte lasted no longer than such things last in a dream. And this time, on the contrary, because at Balbec the old habit was no longer there to keep them alive. And if these effects of habit appear to be incompatible, that is because habit is bound by a diversity of laws. In Paris, I had grown indifferent to Gilberte thanks to habit. The change of habit, that is to say, the temporary cessation of habit, completed habit's work when I set out for Balbec. It weakens, but it stabilizes. It leads to disintegration, but it makes the scattered elements last indefinitely. Day after days, for years past, I had modeled my state of mind as best I could upon that of the day before. At Balbec, a strange bed, to the side of which a tray was brought in the morning that differed from my Paris breakfast tray, could no longer sustain the thoughts which my true love for Gilberte had fed. There are cases, fairly rare, it is true, where one's days being paralyzed by sedentary life, the best way to gain time is to change one's place of residence. My journey of Balbec was like the first outing of a convalescent who needed only that to convince him that he was cured. If only we had another 15 minutes. If you'd like to continue the conversation, head on over to community.alifeofthought.com to share your thoughts and make your voice heard. Remember, we don't take my interpretation here to be the final word, but the first one, a chance to get the conversation started. So I look forward to seeing what you all have to say. If you'd like to mark up the second paragraph, head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15. I'll go ahead and end it here. We've gone a little bit over, but it's our first Daily 15, so what can you do? I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.